Wild Wild Country is a 6-part or 7-part miniseries that was released on Netflix a couple years ago. It was produced by the Duplass brothers, and it's basically the story of this cult or this group of people that followed this religious leader, an Indian guru called Bhagwan, who then moved from India to Oregon in the 80s and settled in the middle of nowhere next to this tiny town out in the countryside, out in the desert or out in the wilderness, with the goal of creating a sanctuary for their belief system and creating this city out of nothing in the middle of nowhere. The first thing that comes to mind when I was watching Wild Wild Country is sort of this, I want to use the word fetishism, but I don't know if that's the right word, but that Westerners have for Eastern philosophy. There's no bigger cliche than a bunch of white people coming from Europe or the United States, going to Asia, to India, to China, to Japan, to Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, and all of a sudden converting to Buddhism or telling you how amazingly rich and spiritual their experience was and why Eastern philosophy is so much more engaging to them than traditional Christianity, basically, I guess what you would call Western religions. And I don't say this to belittle Buddhism or Hinduism or any of these Eastern religions or Eastern philosophies in comparison to, I guess, Christianity. It's just really interesting to me why people gravitate to that. I don't know whether that's because, Christianity and traditional, let's say, Western religions aren't offering enough of what people are looking for, and they're then finding these in these Eastern foreign cultures. But I also don't know if there isn't a part of exoticism, this sort of, like I say, fetishization of this culture that they're not really aware of, but they're fascinated by it because it's different to what they grew up with. I will say that what is clear is the fact that these Eastern philosophies seem to be far more focused on individual well-being, on mind and body being one and the same. And so this is how you get things like yoga, for example, being both physical activity, but also spiritual nourishment. I would also say they're kind of, at least in the way that it's presented in this particular form of Bhagwan's religious teachings, which, is its own thing that he kind of invented. But he's, open to sexuality, and it's not reprimanded. It's not seen as dirty or bad. And when you come from Christianity, Catholicism, in which sexuality is very much pushed off to the side, it's very much taboo, yet so much a part of our lives, I do think that Bhagwan and other philosophies, other religions are far more open to sexuality and to the fact that it's just a normal part of life, is something that can be appealing to a lot of people that feel certainly very constricted, very restricted by our traditional religious teachings. The second thing I'll say, and the second question that arose when I was watching Wild Wild Country, is then the question of, what is a cult? Why was this particular belief system demonized as a cult? Why would it be considered a cult? I mean, they weren't out there killing themselves. It didn't seem as if they were making people stay, forcing people to stay against their will. They weren't trying to enact harm on their followers. I mean, obviously, then there were some people at the head of that kind of went nuts, but isn't that the case for any organization that has any sort of power? So really, why would this be considered more of a cult than any other religious belief system, other than the fact that it was foreign? And I think that's what's really interesting, is why is this more weird than Christianity in any sense, except that we're not used to it?
In the name of Jesus.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God, I execute judgment on you, COVID-19.
Oh, Ramash.
I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer. You get out, we break your power, you get off this nation. I demand judgment judgment on you. I demand, I demand.
And so the series really does explore this open form of xenophobia and the really racist core that exists in American society, because I'd say American because it takes place in the United States. But when you see this small village banding together, not wanting these outsiders to settle here, it really just, reeks of xenophobia, reeks of, I don't know what this thing is, so I don't like it. That's not to say that I want to defend the people that were following the cult, because, or whatever you want to call it, because ultimately I am sort of not opposed, but I'm not really sort of touched by any sort of organized religion. I did find the response of the townspeople to be extraordinarily xenophobic, and honestly, it was this, but if it had been a settlement of, let's say, Muslim, maybe refugees coming in from Syria, or really any other sort of part of the world that was foreign to them, they probably would have acted the same. I really enjoyed Wild Wild Country as a documentary miniseries. I find it has a great many number of qualities, and I really like to compare it to Tiger King. I saw these almost back to back, whereas I criticized Tiger King for, yes, being very entertaining, but also indulging in a sort of spectacle of the weird, and just pointing the camera at these kooky characters and not really diving into their humanity and really kind of exploring their weirdness. This really goes beyond that. I felt every character was complex. You really understood where all of these people were coming from. People that had only good things to say about the time they spent within that community, people that were more critical of it, the outsiders that hated it, and I feel that it had just a lot more to offer than, hey, isn't this crazy? And yes, it's a pretty crazy story, but really just gave everybody their due as human beings. And even with Sheila, who I suppose you can call the villain of the piece, even though I think the film, again, is really good at going back and forth from, oh, I can see where this person's coming from, I like this camp, and I'm against these guys, and then kind of bringing it back and going back and forth until at the end I kind of hated everybody equally, but also I felt they were all, very touching in their own way. But again, Sheila is given proper due and is a complex and interesting person, and, at times is kind of a straight badass. So as always, thanks very much for watching the video. Please be sure to hit the like button if you like the review. Subscribe if you're new, and until next time, see ya.